Greetings and welcome to week one of CIS-4670 Network Security. I am your instructor, Dr. Brandon Brown, and I am going to go over the lecture here for the first week. So let's go ahead and get started. Share my screen. Share. There we go. All right. Get to the if I can get to the right screen here. There we go. My fault. All right, so this week we're going to talk about today's security professional and what cybersecurity, the threat landscape in cybersecurity is all about. We're going to go through chapters 1 and 2, and I'll cover what is due at the end of the week. So let's go ahead and just dive in. I'm starting here out in Canvas. Let's cover your learning objectives, which are to look at resiliency and automation, to strategize and reduce risks, explain the importance of policies, plans, and procedures, summarize business impact analysis concepts, and explain what risk management is and how and why it is important in the overall business landscape. So again, we're going to cover chapter 1 and 2 of your textbook on today's security professional and cybersecurity threats. We're going to review the lecture slides here in this lecture today. Please watch this video and review what homework 1 and assignment is going to be due in week 2. We'll take a glance at that and complete the student learning contract, which should be relatively easy. It won't take you more than about 5 minutes. So let's go ahead and jump in here with the first slide deck. Have a lot to kind of cover today as far as lecture is concerned with 2 chapters. So what does it mean to be a security professional today? Wow, you guys live in exciting times because the job market for cybersecurity professionals is wide open. And if you would have looked at what a cybersecurity professional was 5 years ago, it would be completely different from what it is today. We're starting to see we're not starting to see, we are seeing specializations in cybersecurity, from cybersecurity analysts, which is like the general catch-all broad spectrum of cybersecurity professional, to incident responders who specialize in recovering from a breach, to risk managers, to more technical side folks, such as firewall administrators or cyber analysts that specifically focus on defensive issues, to different industries within cybersecurity, whether it's HIPAA or critical infrastructure. Banking is a specific industry that cybersecurity professionals can focus in on, to offensive security, where you have folks who concentrate on penetration testing, web application testing, red teaming, threat modeling, to reverse engineers who kind of try to figure out what happened during a breach. So there's all different aspects of cybersecurity that you can go into. This specific class is kind of focused on the defensive side, incident response side, more than it is anything else. So we're going to look at different types of attacks, threats, vulnerabilities, the architecture of a good cybersecurity program, and then governance, risk, and compliance, which is a key component to any business. All right, so one of the key learning objectives of this chapter is to understand the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These 3 concepts are core to cybersecurity itself. All right, so confidentiality goes to ensuring that what is held secret or what is classified as secret is secret. Integrity ensures that it remains secret, And then availability ensures that, well, it's there for us to use. So opposite of that is the DAD triad, or the disclosure, alteration, denial. This is the offensive side of the house. So this is what you're trying to prevent. You're trying to prevent disclosure, alteration of data, or denial of access to said data. They kind of go hand in hand with confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So a data breach is where we have a failure of one of those aspects. Typically, the breach aspect of it is not necessarily a denial, but a loss of confidentiality or integrity. There are several different risk factors that come into play with this, whether it's financial risk, strategic, compliance, operational, or reputational. You can have a combination. You can have these happen as one single entity, but typically when a breach happens, all five come into play. There's obviously a financial risk, whether it is the loss of data that can compromise the organization financially, or from a loss of customers. Strategic and reputational kind of go hand in hand, because if you lose that reputation, you might lose a competitive advantage or a strategic advantage. Operational and compliance risks kind of go hand in hand, because operations typically apply to compliance. Compliance is set forth by some sort of governing body, typically the government itself, for you to adhere to certain rules. So how do we ensure this? Well, we have to look at the controls of the environment. And they come in three different factors or flavors: technical, operational, and managerial. Technical controls, for me, are the easiest to come by. This is a learning curve more than it is anything else. So this could be administration of technology, whether it's a firewall, and a domain, an OU, some sort of technical piece of either equipment, programming, configuration, etc., that you can control in order to enforce confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Operational controls include what we're going to do in order to maintain that technology, to ensure that it is available, it is up to speed, it is patched, it is configured correctly and in a secure manner. Managerial control is going to focus on the mechanics of risk management and the process of risk management. So identifying where our risk lay, what can happen that can cause that risk to be exploited through typically a vulnerability, and what's the impact if that comes to fruition, which hopefully we don't have to tackle that, but we at least need to identify it and be ready to address it. So there are different types of controls that come into play when addressing these risks and these vulnerabilities: preventative controls, detective controls, corrective, deterrent, physical, and compensating. They're pretty self-explanatory. Preventative means that it's a control in place to prevent a breach. Detective means, honestly, if a breach occurs, these are what we have at our disposal to figure out what in the world happened. Corrective is if a breach happens, what is the process or what is the play to recover from said breach. Deterrent controls. This is to ward off a potential breach. Physical controls is just that. How do we ensure the physical security of data, of systems, of equipment? And then compensating controls are done to, as a last resort, to prevent loss or minimize loss. So think of insurance, like cyber insurance or other types of insurance that we can make a claim against in order to recoup financial losses. All right, so data protection looks at different types of states: data at rest, data in processing, and data in motion. Data at rest is probably the easiest one to address. This is data on a hard disk, for example, or an SSD. How do we protect that? Is it encrypted? What is the encryption standard? Is it the correct standard? Is it up to scrutiny? Can it be prevented from being reversed? The encryption, that is, or decrypted. Data in processing is data that is actually active in memory. And what are we doing to secure said memory? What controls do we have in place to do that? And then data in motion. Data in motion means it's in transmission. It's going from one IP address to another IP address. And how are we protecting it in that fashion? So data at rest and data in motion, the two most common ways of securing data is via encryption. So data at rest, you have the data encrypted on a hard disk. Data in motion, you're using a virtual private network, a VPN, or some sort of other secure connection. And that data is encrypted between point A and point X. So there are a lot of other different areas of data protection. So a couple that are really prevalent in today's world are data loss prevention, which can detect when data is leaving an area, and we can maybe prevent that data from leaving the server, file, what have you. We talked a little bit about data encryption already. Data minimization is about how we can, again, encrypt or make it harder for a bad actor to gain access to the true data. We can do that through obfuscation, hashing, tokenization, masking. Think about data minimization as MFA, multi-factor authentication. That's one additional step that we put on top of our username and password to ensure access. Data minimization is kind of along those same lines. Okay, so if you have questions on chapter 1, don't hesitate. Get a hold of me. Please, please, please shoot me an email for my class that I'm meeting in person. This is a really good tool to have at your hands in case you either A, miss the class, or B, you want to go back over the lecture notes. But I pretty much go over the same concepts in class from my in-person classes. All right, so let's take a look at chapter 2. Okay, so security threats are ever changing, and some threats have been there forever. Bad actors, internal threats, cyber criminals, cyber activists, nation states, etc. But we're going to dive a little bit deeper and look at this and explain what a threat actor is, what a vector is, what an intelligence source is, and look at the different controls and concerns associated with these different types of vulnerabilities that come up within threats. All right, so let's talk about classifying threats. So threats can be classified as either internal or external. All right, most of the time we are concerned about external threats. We can fight off internal threats or identify internal threats much, much, much more easily. This we should be able to. The level of sophistication or capability by the threat actor, the resource or funding of the threat actor. Is they independent? Are they a lone wolf? Are they part of a collaborative or group effort, say like anonymous? Or are they even funded by a nation state? What is their intent or motivation? So most cyber criminals, it's really easy. Their motivation is money. They want to get paid. They don't care what they do. They don't care if you're down or up or sideways. They just want to get paid. So the other characteristics that differentiate cybersecurity threat actors come in one of these 4 categories. And, it ebbs and flows. It ebbs and flows. For the most part, the intent and motivation of cyber criminals is financial. But there are still those who hold in deep regard maybe an ideology or philosophy. You have to keep that in mind. So the different types of threat actors. Script kiddies, kind of one of the most common. It's a derogatory term for people who are new to hacking and who might just be using tools that they get their hands on, haven't worked with them so much, but they're looking at trying to just get their hands dirty. Hacktivists hack for cause. So they're not out for necessarily a financial gain. They want to draw attention to some thing that is out there, okay? Their cause, if you will. So some really big hacktivists that are happening right now are the Digital Army of Ukraine that is fighting against the Russians over the Ukraine conflict. That is probably the biggest hacktivist group on the planet at this point in time. Others that are out there, Anonymous is active has been active as a hacktivist or hacktivist group over the course of the last 20 years. And there might be more localized hacktivist organizations that might be targeting local businesses, schools, local government, etc. You have criminal syndicates. So this is the organized crime. And hacking online has become a very lucrative, although albeit illicit, means of making a living. So if you're going to try this, yes, you could get rich, and yes, you could go to jail for a very, very, very long time if caught. There's all different types of categories for cybercrime. Some a little bit more innocent than others. For as you can see here, the down goal is typically to make money. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about this concept of advanced persistent threats. Advanced persistent threats are basically where an attacker is able to get into a system and stay in a system by multiple means. So if I breach a system, I may go into that system, make an account, tie that account to not just the administrator group, but to certain services. I might try to take advantage of exploiting or filtration of data. And these attacks are constantly going on. So just because I gain access on day 1 doesn't mean that I'm going to get what I want and then leave by day 2. When I access a system, I'm going to get into it on day 1, stay there on day 2, make lunch for day 3, and pretty much observe and recon for data that might be brand spanking new, and that I can exploit financially. Insider threats happen all the time too. These are sometimes referred to as whistleblowers, although the connotation actually is really bad. But they occur when an employee, contractor, vendor, somebody has a beef with the company and they don't like what they saw or heard or whatever. Excuse me. And they have to, they feel like they have to take it upon themselves to do something about it. An insider will usually be working alone and have limited financial resources and time. Keep that in mind. Insiders are easily caught because typically they are not tech savvy like the rest of the IT team. They make mistakes, they're easily identified, and then over the course of time, they're shown the door. All right, so there's a lot of different threat vectors. And what I mean by a threat vector is how can somebody or something gain access to my system? Well, typically that is through a back door that's already implanted into the system. And the bad guy or gal just has to take advantage of that, that hack. It could be very easy. It could be extremely difficult. But other vectors that we have to look at are direct access, direct wireless, cloud, third party, removable media, etc. So again, be very, very, very leery about what you're plugging into your system. All right, let's talk a little bit about threat intelligence. So OSI, or open source intelligence, is basically how we can gather information on bad guys and gals and what they're doing. So CISA has a really good alert webpage here that you can go to and kind of look at all the different things that have been happening over the last few months. So as of this class, fall 2022, the CIA, FBI, NSA have joint task forces worked up to try to find people who are perpetrating against U.S. assets in order to expose damaging material. So proprietary and closed source intelligence basically allow countries or groups to communicate independently of their country or group. All right, so how do we assess this threat? Well, we have to ask ourselves a series of questions. Is it timely? Is the information new? All right, if it is, well, that's good. It means we are not behind the power curve, but we can catch up. Is the information accurate? So how truthful is this information? And that's the one thing that I struggle with people all the time. Well, what makes you say that? Well, what makes you think this? Or, well, what makes you act this way? You can rely on what it says, how likely it is. Does it rely on single or multiple sources? And how often are those sources correct? So it's a whole formula that goes into it. Is the information relevant? If it is, how does it describe, X? Is this a problem to a prototype? Is this a problem to a new program? Is this a problem to XYZ? Right? All right, we're gonna kind of skip over this one and look at public and private information sharing centers. So again, our lonely analysts basically are sitting there behind a screen and trying to ascertain if a threat is actually happening. Specific US agencies or departments, partners, etc., have critical infrastructure. You can visit this DHS website, and under CISA, it's going to have a listing of critical infrastructure sectors, not necessarily different points, but different sectors. And SPINNY works along the same ways. So it's always good to do your homework, right? So with that said, we need to look at our vendors constantly. They're just because they were trustworthy back in 2009 doesn't mean they're trustworthy today. A lot of shady stuff can go on between point A and point X. The vulnerability feed that and threat feeds from vendors, agencies, private organizations, etc. So it's not just us. If we secure our system, that's great. If we have a vendor, a third party out there that does not reinforce their network security, their system security, the application security, they could breach us by default, right? Or by de facto. So this is a really big deal nowadays. Professional conferences and local industry group meetings. So are you coerced in any way by people at these conferences? And then social media account of prominent security professionals. Are we doing enough to police ourselves online? Right? And if so, how are we conveying it? All right. Ugh. Lost my space here. 1 second. Is that it? Oh, I guess that is the end of the chapter 2 slides. Okay, that's really nice. All right, so let's go back here to what's due this week.